Hi, I'm Nathan Green. I'm one of the more experienced players in our Coterie LARP here in Kansas City, and I am here today to explain to you the Laws of the Night revised system that we'll be using. In this system, you're playing a vampire who is defined by a nature and a demeanor, a series of traits that cover the adjectives that would describe your character, abilities, which are things that you know, and is also how you are going to retest in conflict, and then disciplines, which are your supernatural powers, and backgrounds, which are things like money you have, influences you control, so on and so forth. So the first thing you're going to need to make a character is a concept, which will then be defined by your nature, which is who you really are, and your demeanor, which is who you choose to let people see. So for example, with this throwaway character, we've got a Bruja who chooses for everyone to see that he is a curmudgeon. Everything sucks, and I'm going to tell you that everything sucks. But his actual nature is a deviant, so he tries to experience new things that are outside of the social mores in probably pretty disturbing ways. So because his nature is deviant, he has the opportunity through roleplay to regain willpower points by acting out his nature. So a storyteller or a narrator may see you role-playing your character and award you willpower back that you've spent because you're role-playing your nature accordingly. So when building a character, the first step is to get your nature and demeanor, and then you are going to prioritize your traits between physical, social, and mental. On a new character, that will be 7, 5, and 3. So for our Bruja example, he has 7 physical traits, 5 social traits, and 3 mental traits. He's not horribly smart. These traits, for example, his physical traits are things like brutal, resilient, quick, tough, and that matters because when it comes time to have conflict, you need to use those adjectives to describe what you're doing. Then you and your opponent will throw rock, paper, scissors. The loser loses the trait and suffers the effects that have been described in the challenge. For example, I may be brutal enough to punch you in the face, and you could be enduring enough to not take any damage from that. We would throw rock, paper, scissors, 1, 2, 3, and in the case of a tie, we compare the number of traits that we have in the relevant category. So me being the Bruja with the 7 physical traits, I could say up to 7. And my opponent would bid however many traits they have, and that's how we would determine the tie. In the event that you don't like the outcome, you can use the relevant abilities to get a retest, but your opponent could cancel that ability with their relevant ability. So me being brutal enough to punch you means I am brawling, so I could say I want to retest with brawl, and my opponent who is enduring could say I want to retest with survival. So 1, 2, 3. So he beat me, I say brawl, we go to retest, he says I don't want to retest, I want to win. I bet a survival, that is the end of the challenge. I have failed to punch you in the face. This system is not strictly used for violence, although it can be used that way. It is also used in the case of social and or mental challenges. So if I am Xavier the foppish Toreador who wants to discern whether or not you are telling the truth, I could expend my empathy ability and make a social challenge with you to say, like, I am commanding enough to get you to tell me if you are lying. And we would then go through the rock, paper, scissors the same way we would have before. There is another layer to this when we start talking about disciplines. So it would not be any fun at all to play a vampire without any of the supernatural abilities that make them cool. So in this system, there are different disciplines that cover a wide variety of things that you can do. Your clan will determine what your aptitudes are for disciplines, and then you can use the disciplines depending on what their ability is. So Xavier has an ability called Presence, which is mostly focused around social interactions. So when he is using an ability, for example, Dread Gaze, he could say, I am commanding enough to intimidate you with Dread Gaze. We would throw the challenge, and then the discipline would resolve based on the power, which in this case, I bare my fangs at you, and you get scared and run away. So there is one more type of challenge, which is a static challenge. This is something where a narrator or storyteller needs to know if you would know a certain bit of information or if you have noticed something. This is a challenge where you do not bid any traits, but it has a difficulty based on the storyteller discretion. And it is a challenge against the world we're creating, not against an individual. So in the case of Aura Perception, which is one of those nifty supernatural abilities, you are testing against a static difficulty of another person's mental traits to read their aura. It is very important that this is static because the person in question cannot relent or affect this test in any way. You test against the difficulty against a narrator or storyteller and then either find out the information or do not. Now that we have covered attributes and abilities, we are moving on to backgrounds. These are things about your character that help define who they have been and who they are. Examples of backgrounds would be influence into mortal affairs, like police, media, occult, etc. It could be resources. You are already wealthy for whatever reason you're going to define in your background. And it could be something like generation, which defines how close you are to the proverbial first vampire. The lower your generation, the higher your cap for individual traits. And the harder it is to do some things to you and for you to do some things. There are restrictions to backgrounds and especially generation that need to be discussed with the storyteller because of the setting, which we can get into much more in depth once we've gotten our claws into you here. During the course of the game, you may have the misfortune of taking some sort of damage for some reason. Damage in the setting is defined as bashing, lethal, and aggravated. Bashing damage is what you would take from a human punching you. It doesn't hurt all that much, and it is very easy to heal. In fact, spending one of your blood points will heal 2 bashing damage. Lethal damage is a little bit more serious. Now someone is stabbing you with a knife. That is healed 1 for 1 with your blood. Aggravated damage is worst of all. Vampires take aggravated damage from things like sunlight, fire, other supernatural creatures who have claws and fangs and things. And aggravated damage, you can only heal 1 per night, and it costs 3 blood and 1 willpower point. Okay? So in this setting, your vampire has blood points and willpower points. Your starting values and your maximums are determined by your generation, as well as how many points you can spend in a combat turn. You can spend blood points to boost your physical attributes on a 1 for 1 basis. You can even exceed your generational limits on that, but they disappear at the end of the combat round. You can also spend blood to heal and to mimic humanity. So you could spend a blood so that you don't look pale and deathly, you look flushed and healthy. Or you could spend blood to urinate, for example, if that's important at some point. Willpower represents your determination to get things done. So you can use willpower in certain challenges for a retest that can then be canceled by someone else's willpower. You can also use willpower once per night per attribute category to refresh all the traits that you've lost because you suck at rock, paper, scissors. And you can use willpower to affect your morality and fear levels, which is more in depth than we will get to later. Your character has a path of morality known as humanity, and this represents your desire and intention to hold on to as much humanity as you can, lest you fall to the beast. Every vampire has a beast. Think of it as the devil on your shoulder if it was on speed and steroids and couldn't talk. You interact with the beast in your morality based on 3 traits, which are courage, self-control, and conscience. Courage is whether or not you are able to ignore that fire that's getting ready to give you aggravated damage. Self-control is how well you resist the beast. And conscience is whether or not you have the emotional health to feel bad but not horrible when you've transgressed against humanity. So for example, it is bad to murder things. If you murder someone, you will need to test your conscience to see if you lose a humanity point. If you lose your last humanity point, you are lost to the beast forever and become the next thing that the city has to hunt and kill. So it's important to at least try to act kind of human.